Thank you for joining us on American Medicine Today. I am Kimberly Bermel, joined by my friends Ethan Euchre.
Glad to be here.
And Jeff Wagstaff.
Yes, I am.
Yes. And according to some experts, our constant exposure to electromagnetic frequency radiation from cell phones, laptops, and other devices is one of the most critical health issues facing Western civilization today. And joining us right now is telecommunication industry insider Daniel T. DeBaun, whose new book, Radiation Nation, The Fallout of Modern Technology, describes the risk we all face. Thanks for being here, Daniel.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I really appreciate the opportunity to share what we've learned over the last several years.
Well, let's get into that because
Yes.
we had a local company here that basically they have these devices that are supposed to block some of the EMFs and whatever. But for people unaware of what we're talking about, describe
Explain
what EMFs are and how they affect us.
There are several types. There's extremely low frequency stuff and radio frequency stuff. The extremely low frequency stuff is from wires that run by your house, your refrigerator's motor, your hair dryer, your toaster oven. All of them emit extremely low frequency at typically 60 hertz. And then there's radio frequency. All your cell phones use that connection. Bluetooth connections, router connection. When you use your laptop and you're talking to your router, it's a Wi-Fi connection that's getting there. Those are the basic parts of the RF and ELF that is in our environment today.
And you're saying all of those are bad for our health?
Actually, it turns out that when you're really, really close to it, that's when it's most dangerous.
Okay.
If you're far enough away from it, it's not a problem at all.
Now-
So it's only when you really get close to the emissions that you got to be worried about it.
Now, is that different for children, though?
It is. Actually, it's funny. There's the standard for cell phones, the strength of the energy of a cell phone transmitter is so it can't penetrate a man's head, a 6-foot male, by 1 inch. A child using the same phone that's 6 years old, it goes completely through their head.
You know, that's dangerous because I have a little girl and she's 8.5 and she loves technology. She wants to be around computers, be around cell phones, play games. And you mentioned in here that they shouldn't hold them on their lap, but that's exactly what they do. They bend their knees, they kind of sit back and bend the knees and have the phones right in front of them or right in their lap. So you're saying that's dangerous?
If you're a male and you have a laptop in your lap or a cell phone near your groin area, 25% of the male sperm is immobile after about 3 or 4 hours.
Wow.
A female is impacted by tumors if it's excessively close to the body.
Right.
And some of that actually converts cancerous cells.
Wow. When you say that, sperm counts go down, I mean, is that a temporary thing or that's for the rest of your life?
It turns out that it is most often temporary.
Okay.
But over long periods of time,
Sure.
it becomes more damaging and more permanent. That's science. That's research facilities finding out the evidence through testing. And that's what we're learning. And by the way, this stuff never was a big deal 10, 15 years ago because none of us had cell phones. None of us had laptops. None of us had stuff that was near our bodies. All of a sudden, we have this preponderance of technology all around us every day. And that's why.
And how scary.
And that's what's happening. All of a sudden, it's really, really close to us.
Right.
And we're a real live experiment to see what the impact is. What we know
horrible.
is last year the National Toxicity Program, which is the division of the federal government, did an epidemiology study. What they found was that exposures to the population increased the cancer cells of the frontal lobe brain by 2 to 13%, depending on how close, depending on the strength of the signal.
Why has the news not covered this?
A great question. The reason I wrote the book, I worked for Bell Labs many years ago, and I looked at data as a sort of way of doing business. My sons were using their laptops on their lap for hours at a time. My wife says to me, boy, that can't be good I want grandchildren. So what I did was I did some research, and I began finding a lot of research data available. But yet, it wasn't in the public domain. That's why I wrote the book.
I wanted to ask you previously, Daniel, when we were talking about lower sperm count, it occurred to me, do we know, sure, it might affect the count level, but does the radiation affect like the actual DNA and the genes and the chromosomes of the sperm? Does it mutate that at all? Do we know anything about that?
I'm not sure we know much about that. It's speculation, but I can tell you for sure that when you have a cell exposed too closely, there is direct steps related to the exposure of damaged DNA and mutated cells. There's just no doubt about it. Science is very clear about it.
You know, hearing this information, of course, those of us in the studio, people listening at home are kind of saying, well, why aren't we hearing about this? Don't know if this is related or not, but the cell phone
it's
industry.
funny. When I was 12 years old, and this is quite a number of years ago, I smoked cigarettes. At that time, there was nothing in the public domain that said there was a direct link to cancer. This is going out 30, 40 years ago.
Right.
And yet, science at that time knew that, in fact, there was no question about it. There was a direct link to cancer of the lungs. So how long did it take before we found out in the public domain that it was a problem? 30, 40 years? Well, that's what's happening here. That's a good parallel.
Well, there's
Look
one.
at trans fats. We knew trans fats were a problem 40 years ago as well. It's only been this past year that was banned from our environment. So, to the answer, I don't really know why, but it certainly seems to be patternistic.
Well, and one thing that just to consider is that the cell phone manufacturers and the cell phone carriers are one of the largest categories of advertisers, radio, television, and print.
Have you ever read your paperwork for your iPhone?
Nope.
It says, don't put it to your head.
But then equally as bad is the fact you just said Bluetooth emits the same
Right.
signal, and you
RF
have it right in your ear, the closest thing to your brain.
Let me explain to you what an RF signal is.
Okay.
When you go in the microwave and you put a piece of meat in the microwave, it heats up the water between the cells. The cells oscillate, and you have cooked meat. That is a 2.3 gigahertz signal. It's something around 2. Remember, it's around 2. Well, your RF signal from your cell phone,
Right.
your Wi-Fi, your Bluetooth, are around 2. Almost identical signals. The power levels are less. They're a thermally emitting signal that
Right.
can damage the cell. And it cooks you just like it does in a microwave oven, but at a much slower rate. That's why so many people say, my head hurts when I use a cell phone.
Well, your brain's
It heats
cooking.
up.
Yeah. Well, Daniel, listen,
It's
we're
cooking the cells.
we're almost up against the break. You got about a minute left. What are some
Giving up
tips
my cell phone.
that people can use to protect themselves from this ever-present EMF?
If it's 1 foot away, 80% of the danger is gone. 4 foot, 98%. The rule of thumb is to protect yourself, keep it away from you.
Daniel, as you speak, everyone is in the
We're
studio.
moving our
moving
phones.
their
We've
phones
moved our
away.
cell phones far, far away.
No joke. Yeah.
Put it slightly away, and there's not a problem.
Well, I carry mine around in my pocket, so when you in my front
smart.
pocket too, so it's like right next to the boys.
I'd like to point out that Ethan and his wife have not had children. There may or may not be a correlation. there.
He's
there
the
may.
one who has the cell phone in his front pocket,
That's
right?
that's me. Yeah.
It's going to start carrying too.
Well, listen, we're out of time, but really good information, Kimberly.
Thank you so much, telecommunication industry insider Daniel T. DeBaun, whose new book, Radiation Nation, The Fallout of Modern Technology, describes those risks. Thank you so much for taking the time to share such
Well,
an
thank you.
important
I
story with
appreciate
us.
All right.
Absolutely.
Have a good one. Happy holidays.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Wow.
Yeah.
I don't want one of those by my head.
But you know what? An hour from now, we'll all still be holding the phones to our heads, and I'll still have it in my pocket. So it doesn't matter. Hearing about the risks, we're still not really going to change our behavior.